Welcome to the Digital Disruption Podcast. I'm Claire van der Zant, Chief Exec of Novus Strategy and your host for this month's episode. In case you don't make it to the end, please do give us a like and a share, though stick around because I'm a little bit giddy for this one. We started 2026 with huge promise for the industry. The announcements came thick and fast for roadmaps, collaborations, sandboxes, and more, all setting out intentions to reimagine the fabric of the infrastructure for home buying and selling. Why? Because as an industry, we know what the problems are. It's data, manual, duplicated, non-portable, non-provenance data. What this unlocks is the ability to finally tackle the time to complete and the scale of fall throughs that the industry feels. Hence the giddiness, because this is a conversation not just about intention, but about proof. It's showing the direction of travel for standardized, trusted, portable data and that it works. So I'm delighted to be joined today by Stephen Ward, Director of Strategy and External Relations and Deputy CEO at the CLC, Eddie Davies, Deputy Director for PropTech and Platform Integration at HM Land Registry, and Kieran Witt, founder at Kotini, an automated onboarding platform for estate agents. In our April magazine, Stephen shared exciting developments from the work underway in the Smart Property Data Sandbox program. And today we get a chance to bring that to life with Eddie and Kieran, who have been part of the successful first test of the trust framework. Before we dive into questions to bring this all to life, Stephen, do you want to give everyone a quick overview of what the Smart Property Data Sandbox is and what the outcomes are that we're looking to achieve?
Yes, absolutely. I'm delighted to do so. I'm very pleased to have this opportunity to talk about it because, like you, Claire, I am giddy about this, and it's not often you'll hear a regulator admit to being giddy. But this is truly, we're now on the cusp of a revolution in how we buy and sell houses in England, and it's going to be amazing. But one of the big things that's got to happen is that we've got to change the way we handle the data about property. And one of the things that drives slow and uncertain transactions and high fall through rates at the moment, around 20 to 30%, depending on who you believe, is that data only becomes available in dribs and drabs after the buyer has said, yeah, I think I'm going to buy this property. Very unlike other purchases that we make in our day-to-day lives. So this is a really exciting project. It's funded by the regulator's Pioneer Fund, which is part of the Department of Business and Technology, and was initiated by Radium, who provide the tech behind open banking in the UK. And in Brazil as well, and the scale of that, you will understand, in Brazil is enormous, and they can demonstrate that it's very robust. And the Open Property Data Association, which brings together all kinds of organisations that are handling and generating data for the home buying and selling process, or the property sector, I should say, to drive those transactions. And they've been thinking for a number of years now about, well, how do we tackle this problem of data? And they've developed a data schema, which is really, really important. And now we are looking at, through this, big breath, Smart Property Data Trust Framework Sandbox, as you described, how data can be extracted from different sources, shared with provenance and trust, not just to one user, but beyond that, from that user to another, so that it can be used in a property transaction with confidence, where we need to be able to share data between many players in different ways, in different directions. So people, I'm sure, are familiar with open banking. And in open banking, which is wonderful and has been revolutionary, but has got, we're now looking at open finance, and that's going to be even more exciting. Open banking, I say to my bank, I want to share my current account data with this person or this organization, and that happens. And that's great, and that's really revolutionary, as I say. But what we've got to do in home buying and selling is say, this is data about the property that I'm selling, and I want to share this part of it with a surveyor so that they can do their job. I want to share this bunch with a lender so that they can make a lending decision about it. I want to share this part, a lot of it, with potential buyers so that they can make decisions about whether they want to buy it or not. And that's obviously just scratching the surface. Those are just the things that immediately come to mind. So it's cracking that complexity nut so that I, as a seller, can bring my property to market, hand over all of the information about a property that's germane to a seller, and they can make a properly informed decision. And then all the professionals who will then work on the transaction can work quickly, knowing that they've got all the information they need and that they can trust it because they can see its provenance. So I hope that explains what we're doing. We've got a range of participants working in the sandbox now that Radium and OPDA have created, and it's going very well. It's very interesting. But the pioneers were Land Registry, Eddie, and Kieran from Kotini, who've made a huge difference by really proving the basic concept of that transfer of data with provenance and trust, which has been huge and paves the way for hackathons, which are ongoing, looking at different business use cases, which obviously I've just sort of described. Some of them are many and varied. So that's where we are. We're also working on all of the governance, and we'll talk about that later, which is really important. But we're proving that the tech can work. And once we can do that, then we can revolutionize the way homes are transacted in the UK.
Hurrah. Very exciting.
Hurrah.
And as somebody who's in this at the moment with my second broken chain, yes, get it done. Let's get it done. So on cracking that nut then and demonstrating that this is actually working, Eddie and Kieran, I'm gonna come to you. So the article talks about trusted data being accessed and shared, as Stephen's just outlined, crossing organisational boundaries, which is something that we know has always been a cause of fragmentation. Can you walk us through in a bit more detail what happened in the Sandbox test? Like what moved between whom, and what would have happened to the data in the current process?
Yeah, so I can probably lead on that, and then Eddie, you can probably add to that. So from Kotini's perspective, so just a bit of context about Kotini. We do automated onboarding for estate agents, but a big part of that is gathering and collecting material information as early in the process as possible, for agents to meet their competition market authority requirements, but also to give buyers that information they need to make an informed choice and essentially try and protect their pipeline. With the more data you've got, you understand the property better, you'll find the right buyer essentially. So from our perspective, in this sandbox, we're what you would consider a data receiver for a lot of things, where we would request data from a source such as HM Land Registry, receive that, and then provide that to estate agents or their end customers to review, understand, and give them some additional information around that. So we've focused on this as an initial use case and leveraged the sandbox to facilitate the movement of data from HM Land Registry. We already had connections. We're using the SOAP APIs through HM Land Registry to get these documents and get this data. But one of the things that we're not able to get and do with that data is then pass it onwards with trust. The provenance isn't kind of wrapped around that data. And the way that we collect it as well is a little bit old school. So it's a more modern way of kind of collecting that data. And I think we'll get into more on the benefits of that. So the fundamental data that we obtained was no different that we'd get from HM Land Registry. It's things like tenure, who are the proprietors, are there any restrictions and things like that we'd normally get through the gateway. But it was kind of how the data was moved that changed. So without getting too technical, the data came with a signature that sat alongside the payload, not inside it. So that allows any receiver of that data to verify it without altering the response body. And so it becomes untampered data, essentially. The data also came with a key, which is registered against the data provider in this, what we call a trust framework. And that allows anyone to check that key and make sure essentially that data has come from a legitimate source. And again, that's one of the things that's missing. And if a downstream provider wants to take data from Kotini, they have to fundamentally trust Kotini as a business, not the trust framework or the provider of the data. In this new world, where you don't need to trust Kotini at all, you just need to trust that trust framework is well governed, in place, and that the source data provider is someone you can trust. Kotini is just a kind of postman, for want of a better terms. So yeah, what changed was the kind of trust and the provenance that sat around that data, our ability to prove that this data is credible and reliable, essentially.
Brilliant. I'm definitely not technical, so SOAP completely goes over my head. The point about this then being able to cross those organisational boundaries, this is a huge step forward in a place where we've been struggling. Eddie, from HM Land Registry's perspective, same question to you.
Well, firstly, we were so excited to get involved in this initiative. Yes, we are a data provider because it's so important in terms of the data we hold and that feeds into the process as early as possible. But we've got to remember, we are ultimately the recipients of some of this data when we go through the registration process. So it's vitally important that that data that we receive at the end of the process is accurate. Because if it's not accurate, we've got to write out to people and we've got to ask them to correct certain data. So we saw ourselves with two hats on, really. One as a data provider into the sandbox of trusted data, but two as a beneficiary at the back end of this. So we've almost got a vested interest for this to work. We still receive applications where we do have to write out because there are data errors in that application, and we want to eradicate that, and this is an opportunity to do that up front. So a real great opportunity from our point of view. It also showed how public-private sector collaborations can work, because our data isn't in the most usable format. So Kieran's been very kind in terms of how he took our data and was able to use that data, make it more accessible. So when it was shared more widely within the sandbox, it was in a format that people could integrate with a lot easier. Now, we're a large organization. For us to do that, we might need to go through programs and projects to get resource to be able to do that. But working collaboratively, public and private sector, we were able to do that, working jointly together. So some of the heavy lifting on converting our data into a more usable format was done within the sandbox by partners within the sandbox, just to prove the concept, because it's really important that this was about proving the concept here. We didn't need 6 months worth of work to get the data in the right format in Land Registry before it was shared. It's like, let's get the data out, let's reuse the data, and let's prove the concept. So from our point of view, really exciting piece of work, and our continuing engagement in this is something that we want to support.
Love it. The collaboration point that you talk about, I just think is so important. This is never going to be something that we could solve individually in our different silos. It was always going to have to be about us coming together, and even in the sandbox test, to hear that that's happening is truly brilliant. Kieran, I want to pick up on something that you mentioned. Organizations don't have to trust Kotini, because it pulls on a different point you also made in the article, which is around this idea of innovation tax. Collaboration of the industry is important, but it's a huge industry. We know that it's got huge fragmentation within it. Just to get everybody involved and to get sort of a critical mass is really important. And there are going to be larger firms and smaller firms that need to be part of this. So kind of on your phrase of innovation tax, to describe what smaller firms might face when trying to connect into an ecosystem like this. And especially as we start to turn towards the idea of how do we scale this? How do we get distribution? How important is that accessibility piece to participate in terms of achieving those goals?
Yeah, I think it's extremely important, but that comes from a partly biased view of being a smaller business, having gone through this kind of what I call innovation tax. And fundamentally, just a huge amount of time is repetitively spent on solving the wrong problem, and that's accessing data, right? If there is this framework where you can participate and everyone can access data in the same consistent way, that problem falls away and resource is then reinvested in delivering that innovation, and that disproportionately impacts the smaller businesses because they haven't historically built those connections with those data providers over time. So when I talk about innovation tax, It's the kind of sea of innovation that will become unlocked once this trust framework is up and in place. And you can kind of draw parallels a bit. I know we're going to mention probably open banking a fair few times, but you can draw parallels to open banking where once that kind of unlocked for the financial services, you saw just a wave of innovation that just started to appear, right? So aggregating bank accounts, helping people to make faster payments quickly, embedded lending, better affordability checks. And I can kind of see that same thing happening when the barriers to getting access to data lowers, not to be confused with giving anyone access to it. It has to be governed. There has to be a framework around it. But once your problems, you're not trying to solve, how do I get this data? Everyone starts to think, well, what can I do with this now? And you can start to innovate, and that will impact businesses at all levels, right? There'll be much larger businesses that are able to do things a lot quicker, but then also a lot more new entrants that are able to come in and deliver innovation, essentially. Yeah, for me, I don't know whether it's a primary benefit or a secondary benefit, but you've got the trust and the provenance being able to work in this kind of multifaceted, multi-relationship ecosystem, but then reducing the barriers to entry for innovation, really.
Yeah, I think it is incredibly important. The challenge of, great, we can prove this, but how do you make it scale, has always been the subtext to lots of the pilots and proof of concepts that have come before. And this is why this is so important, because it is about an open ecosystem with trust, with provenance, with standards. But it's about, look, this is infrastructure. This is how everybody can play. And that's how we address the distribution and that scale challenge to, no, this is really the right thing because it also does this. Super important. Eddie, you've touched on data and perhaps some of the complexities in a large organization. What did it take from your side to make the data available in this way, with a little bit of help from Kieran and Kotini? Is it fundamentally different from how you make data accessible today, or is it a bit of an evolution of something that is already underway?
I would say evolution. We've shared data for many years. I was involved way back when we first started to share property price information way back. So I can't remember a time when we've actually declined a request, a legitimate request to use data within the home buying and selling process. We might put some limitations around its use, but I can't remember. So we've shared data for many years. We've grown the number of APIs that people can gain access to. We do want to introduce more APIs over the next couple of years as well. So I'd say it is an evolution. The change, however, is rather than us having to sign bespoke contracts with individual firms, go through individual impact assessments for every firm that wants to access the data, even in the same chain, licensing agreements for all those individual firms. The change here was for us to be able to share that data once in a trusted environment with trusted parties who have been authenticated to be able to use that data, bake provenance into that data. So to share it once, almost rinse and repeat in the nicest possible sense, but where people can reuse that data once. Now that's got simplicity from our side because we just share it once. We have one agreement in terms of who's using the data. It's going into a trusted framework. So it's not the Wild West. It's not anybody using your data for whatever they want. It's connected with the housing market and the housing transactions. So yeah, I would say rather than it being revolutionary, this was evolutionary from our point of view. It raised lots of questions. And one point of the sandbox was to surface those questions so we could discuss them. But yeah, evolution from our point of view, and some of the findings have been excellent, but certainly simplifies the process that we would have in terms of sharing data.
I mean, that's brilliant, right? If any of this process creates an undue burden on one part of the process, we've kind of not got it right. But the fact that actually, yes, there are things that you're going to need to do, but the long-term view is that this is simplification for you as well is brilliant. I'm conscious that we're all getting very giddy about this. So I just wanted to take a moment just to pause and perhaps put a little bit more colour as to why this really is different to what we've been trying to do before and why it's important. So, Stephen, we draw a fairly clean line between bilateral data sharing, which we've talked about here, that, individual licensing and point-to-point piece, which already exists, and then what we're trying to do here in terms of open ecosystem level sharing. Why can't the bilateral model just keep scaling as it is? What breaks?
I think to answer that question, we need to think about the home buying and selling process, which I've sort of briefly looked at. And I must give a shout out to the amazing work of the Home Buying and Selling Council and the Digital Property Market Steering Group. HBSC, under the leadership of Beth and Kate, has done amazing work to look at new ways of delivering transactions and for the whole sector to work together more effectively. And I think that's a really important point, to collaborate more effectively to deliver improvements for consumers and for the market and for the economy. What I think breaks is that if you think about what has to happen in a home buying and selling transaction, how many professionals are involved. Obviously, you've got the seller and the buyer, but then you've got their estate agent we've heard about, and the estate agent has got some obligations under the material information regulations policed by CMA, as well as their own professional obligations. Then mortgage brokers get involved. They need a different slice of information than about the buyer and the property than the estate agent needs. Then you've got the conveyancer, who needs a different set of information, again, bigger one probably. But again, not everything that the buyer wants to see does the conveyancer need to see. So it's a different set. And you've got the lender as well in most cases. You've got the removals company, you've got the surveyor. So you've got a big pot of information about a property and about the owner and the buyer of the property that needs to be shared in all kinds of different directions. And as soon as you start to think about that, I think you can understand why having individual provision from, say, Land Registry to each of the players that might need the different bits of Land Registry information that might be available for this. And they would be trying to assemble that information from multiple sources to do their bit of the job. You can see how that doesn't really take us much further forward than where we are now. It digitizes the current process effectively. What we've got to do is be able to give the seller the power to bring all of their information together virtually. It doesn't mean that there's like a big data dump with all of the data. It's pulling data in real time from the sources and all the rest of it. And share that on an informed basis with whoever needs it. So the bilateral model just can't cope with the complexity of home buying and selling, I think is fundamentally the issue. And having that trust framework where you've got accredited participants, so the land registries, Kotinis, the case management providers, all of the other innovators that are coming into the market, able to join one scheme once and share data in all sorts of directions because they become a trusted player, they are held to agreed standards, is going to deliver this radical change that we are all looking for. And I think Kieran gave the example of open banking. The example I always give is transport data, and how before transport data was digitized and able to be shared, we couldn't have imagined that using my phone, I would be planning, my summer holidays with, a range of different providers and the rest of it. So I think there's what we know will be achieved from this process, and there's what we don't know that will come with all that innovation. And we know there's loads of innovators out there already. Geovation is up and running. There are loads of other incubators and just people working on their own in back bedrooms to solve problems that they've experienced or seen in the sector. And this makes it possible for them to come in much more easily and much more quickly to deliver those. And I hope we're going to see an even more vibrant innovation around this once this is all up and running.
Fantastic. I guess I'll give you the punchline on why it doesn't work and why it breaks. Unfortunately, the time to complete keeps going up. We're now at about 134 days average, and Mortgage cancellations are also continuing to go on the rise, with fall throughs somewhere around 33%. So, for all the things that you've just said, this isn't the way. And we see that very clearly in the data, and we're going in the wrong way at the moment. So we just need to plow on forward with this.
It's worth saying as well that transaction lengths are unacceptable, and they're one of the things that contribute to fall through rates. But what we're really trying to get to here is speed to confidence in the transaction. When am I, as buyer or seller, going to be confident this transaction is going to complete, and roughly when, or exactly when, rather than at the moment where, it stretches off into the distance and you're never really sure when it's going to complete until you've exchanged. And even then, there might be some wiggle. So what we really want to get to is certainty much, much earlier in the process. And then you can choose when you want to complete at a time that's convenient for you, rather than having to work around what works for the process, which is not how it should be.
I haven't heard that term before, but I might steal it because it is brilliant. Speed to confidence. That really, really does underpin what we're trying to achieve here. So the sandbox, if it's going to prove that it's proven that the technical plumbing works, what's left to do? We touched on this at the beginning and wanted to pull on that thread. Is the harder problem the governance, the commercial models, the liability, or is there something else to actually then going from tests that Kieran and Eddie and others have proven into something that we can use in anger?
Yeah. So I'll talk about governance and commercial models and all that sort of thing in a minute. Because I think that's all kind of manageable. It's been done elsewhere. It's a tested route. It's just doing it. We just got to do it. So we'll come on to that in a second. I think the real challenge that we've faced in this sector is a consequence of what I've already described. There are so many different professionals and organizations and service providers involved in a transaction. And we need, and not only that, but there are so many of those. How many estate agent companies are there in England? I don't know. Many. And we've got, a whole lending ecosystem. And we've got to get all of these players to move together to deliver this change. So one of the opportunities is that as we describe more and more accurately and with greater confidence how the future system is going to operate in real detail, it becomes easier for all of those players to have confidence in it and move forward together. I think, if I mentioned before, the Home Buying and Selling Council, all the great work they've done, their challenge has been precisely to get everybody to move to adopt new ways of working that deliver those benefits. Because until you get a certain degree of adoption, and it's pretty high, you don't get the network effects in home buying and selling that you need to be able to demonstrate, yes, this is actually revolutionizing. But we do have great examples, NPTN, Project 28, they're all delivering great proofs that it makes a difference. So I think that is our big challenge, and I think that's why it's so welcome that the government is playing a part here. Normally you might say, we don't want the government involved because they slow everything down, and legislation makes everything more clunky and slow. I don't think we need much legislation here, so that shouldn't get in the way. But what we do need is the sort of convening power and persuasive power, if I put it that way, of government to help everybody make those steps and make those leaps forward. Turning to the sort of governance piece, there's nothing new under the sun, and why reinvent the wheel and all those other cliches. Open banking has a great system for governing participation in the open banking scheme for both data providers and data users. We've got a work stream for the SPDTF that is looking at that and is developing a high-level set of rules for the governance of the scheme for participation and for continued participation, because of course it's one thing to be allowed in to use the data and to play in the space, but we also need to be able to kick people out if they're not maintaining those standards that we expect. So all of that goes on. I think a great thing about this process is that there aren't huge changes to liability because we're sharing data in a way just as we used to with provenance from the data provider that we always relied upon. And we're proving through the chain of use of that data that it came from that provider. So, we're not upsetting that particular apple cart too much, I think, and that should be reassuring, I would hope, for market players. So I hope that can all be cracked alongside the technical development of the sandbox. And it should be said, there's more to that than, I don't want to be flippant about it. It can be done, but there is a lot of hard work to do it. And the other thing that we have to do is say, yes, we've got the OPDA data schema, but there are other data schemas available. So we've got to come up with one that the industry agrees on. So I would say above the governance arrangements of the trust framework, we will need an overall industry-wide governance framework for the home buying and selling process, so that everyone can come together, agree, what it is on day one, and then do the running repairs on it that will be needed as we continue and as the world around us changes. So we'll need that kind of level of governance and the governance of this particular scheme as well. That should all be music to the ears of the lawyers that I regulate, because that gives them great certainty. It gives them a rules-based approach that should be very clear.
Fantastic. I'm conscious that we've got, as you say, the conveyancing side, the data side, HMLR, the estate agency portion of this chain here. We obviously don't have representation from a lender in this conversation. Just for any of the lenders listening to this, what's the so what for them? If this framework matures, what changes for them operationally for the better, and what can they do that they can't do today? And Eddie, I know you and I have already had a quick chat on this, so I'll probably come to you first, but it'd be great to hear from you on this as well.
So it's about reducing the friction for the lenders, and this is what we've got to remind ourselves. And I think Stephen touched on this, but this is not new data. This is data that we're all sharing or all exchanging already. So it's not new data. But getting that data right up front has got benefits for every actor in the process, lenders being a very important actor in that process. And I was talking to one of the large lenders recently, and within a year, they see around about 9,000 name mismatches where the name doesn't match with the register, around about 8,000 address mismatches, which in 2026 just shouldn't happen. No. Yeah, it shouldn't happen in 2026. And behind every mismatch, there's a real life person with a life event that they want to complete, be it moving home or remortgaging. And when there's a data mismatch, it might mean that person falls out of the automated process. So, you can't use digital signatures. You can't use an automated process. So you bump into the paper process world, which is longer. So for the lenders, it's the confidence that the data is right up front, and then that data stays unchanged unless it's a legitimate change throughout the transaction, and everybody's got the confidence to use that data, and that will reduce friction costs for lenders, and it will reduce operational costs as well. We're continuously talking to a number of the lenders about this problem. They have this problem in their process. We have data errors in our process, so we're continually talking to them anyway on an individual basis, that this brings it together from a collaboration in the sandbox. So yeah, it's a reduced friction benefit to them. I don't know whether Kieran wants to add anything to that.
Yeah, just building on that, like there's so much data, answers, facts that are collected throughout the transactional process before a lender even comes on the scene, and today it's just lost. It just goes into the ether, and that is oftentimes that data, and we see it with estate agents. We will pull in data from what is deemed to be a credible source. They will then review that data and then apply their professional opinion and almost enrich that data, ready for the next participant to take it. But because there isn't this mechanism of passporting that data with trust, it gets lost. And that can be, at times, assumptions here to lenders and other parties in the transaction, right? Particularly when there are discrepancies and they need corrections, and you get that professional overlay. So I think the sandbox and a test is really just showing how we can leverage that knowledge and insight created by the professionals across the market to speed up the process. And yeah, I think Eddie's hit the nail on the head. It's just going to reduce the amount of manual checking that's done, the rekeying, the revalidating, and it should ultimately just mean more automation, faster triaging, better audit trails, and just earlier risk decisions. And to steal Stephen's phrase, faster speed to confidence, right, for the lenders in their decision making and credit risk.
I was going to say exactly the same thing. That speed to confidence. It's not just for the consumer, but for business as well. Triaging, faster decisions, getting to risk decisions quicker. That to me is the absolute win here for everybody in the process. Every actor within this has a pipeline, and so if we can de-risk that pipeline with better access to data, that's a win-win for business right there. It's also kind of one of the themes that we return to in our thought leadership and content a lot. Lenders, but everybody is digitally quite mature. We've got work to do still, but digitally quite mature, but systemically stuck. We've talked a lot today about, this is about portability. This is about being able to cross those organizational boundaries. Do we think we've got the evidence now within the work that we've done so far in the sandbox to show that the infrastructure is catching up with, we know what the problem is. It's just we didn't have a solution to fix it. Are we catching up? And do you see any barriers now for either more participants coming into the sandbox or beyond sandbox, how we get people engaged?
I think there's a lot of evidence that all the players in the market are ready for this change. And they might not be sort of technically ready or systemically ready, you're quite right. But everybody wants to make these changes. And that's because, as we've just said, really, I've focused on the benefits to the consumer because I'm a regulator and that's what I really care about. But if we think about home buying and selling, for conveyancers, certainly it's a high volume, low margin business, especially compared to other legal services, right? So every bit of efficiency that you can drive out is massively, massively valuable. So getting that upfront information, and more importantly, accurate information there, so that that accurate information flows through the transaction and appears accurately in the new title that we try to lodge with Land Registry, rather than inaccurately in that new title, is really, really important. And I think there as well, there's a benefit for the lenders too, because one of the things that we as a regulator focus on quite a bit is what I hate to call, but is the industry standard name, post-completion work, because it happens after the ink is dry on the transaction. And it gives the impression that everything's done. It's not, because you haven't lodged the title with the Land Registry, so you haven't protected the new owner and you haven't protected any lender. So one of the great benefits to everybody involved is that this accurate information flowing through should mean that those inaccuracies that Eddie mentioned earlier on shouldn't find their way into that application to the Land Registry, and everyone will be protected kind of as soon as the ink is dry, as I say, on there. Although it won't be ink anymore, will it? It will be a qualified electronic signature, which is also very exciting, which I'm also giddy at. So I think that's really good. But I think the evidence that we see, not just from Sandbox participation, but from elsewhere in the ecosystem, is that lenders are ready and are very interested in adapting their systems to these new ways of working. If you think about those lenders who have now got little indicators on Rightmove, for example, that they will lend on this particular property in principle, that sort of thing, if we talked about that 10 years ago, we would just thought it was science fiction. You couldn't possibly do that. But here we are. And that's another example of smoothing out the process, because, if I need if I go in as a buyer and I see that, I have much more certainty about which properties I'm going to go and view, for example. So at every step, making this data available upfront, making it available to those multiple players is saving everybody time, effort, and grief and stress.
What we are going to see with this ability to access data in an entirely new way is a complete redesign of the customer journey. because
And
we
I've
can do
just
things differently. Ta-da!
Exactly. I've just remembered what it was going to say, because of course we've got the UK Finance Sandbox about open finance data, and we've got a property data sandbox. Suppose you could join the two up and they could speak to each other. Just imagine what could happen then. What kinds of innovations you could see in the way that the consumer is served, in the way that financial actors can have greater confidence, access to information, and so on. So I think, great benefits there coming as well.
Fantastic. Before we all melt in this sultry May that we're having, let's wrap on some final thoughts from you. We've talked about the fact that there were innovations that came out of open banking that we couldn't have imagined immediately. Is there anything that surprised you so far in engaging and working in the sandbox? Is there anything that didn't work in the way you expected, or was there something that you didn't expect to learn but did? From all of you, what have been your reflections?
So I can kick off. So from my perspective, we're a startup, right? We've been going for about 4 years, so a relatively technically mature business insofar as our technical capabilities. Connecting onto this it wasn't months of program work, project work to do this. It was an order of magnitude of days to connect on. So that was kind of the first kind of surprising piece. And then the second thing, which we kind of knew going into this, which I suppose it's like a snowball effect. Because there's only a couple of people participating in the sandbox, the value of connecting into the sandbox is limited to those that you can get the data from and whatnot. But that is now starting to pick up really nicely. We're seeing companies like Sprift, property data providers connect into their, search providers connect into there. And so that's starting to really accelerate now. And I think that pace will just start to go faster and faster and faster the more people are in there, because the network becomes more valuable. So that's starting to surprise me a little bit, which is quite exciting.
Great. Eddie?
I'll give you a learns and I'll give you a surprise. Learns is the importance of provenance. So being a data provider, you sometimes feel that you can just send your data out there and people have to trust it because it came from you. But having that provenance digitally baked into the data is so important for this system to work, because of it's going to be passed on to actor, and that provenance that you provided, that upfront, and that digital stamp that it's come from, that trusted data provider, is so important. So I learned that. Maybe you tell me I should have known that already, but it's something that I personally took out of the sandbox. Surprised is by the opportunity here. If you couple the development of AI and AI agents into an ecosystem that's sharing data, and have those agents being able to process that data and provide responses back to the different actors in the process, not necessarily making decisions, but at least providing these are the assumptions. I think the opportunities here are considerable, and I think technology in that space is happening at a rate of knots. Those opportunities are going to be bigger and bigger over the next kind of 12 to 18. We're not even talking 5 years away here. We're talking kind of probably 1 to 2 years, if we really want to take those opportunities, and that's really important. So yeah, surprised by just the scale of the opportunity that exists.
And Stephen, to you, and I guess your little plug for any calls to action that you might have on the sandbox as well.
Well, I'm a simple regulator, so I've learned a huge amount, and a lot has surprised me because I've learned about technical things that I had no clue about before, and that's exactly how it was supposed to work. So that's great. What surprised me, yes, absolutely, was the ease with which joining could happen. Some joiners needed help, and that was a great learning thing for the project as well, because it tells us how we'll need to be prepared for onboarding in a future model. So that's really, really useful. But then once in, how quick players have been to understand opportunities, take them and think about new business use cases, that sort of thing. Because we've got something like 40 plus data users and providers using the sandbox now. As Kieran said, the more we have doing that, the more benefits we see, the more complex the use cases can become, and all that sort of stuff. So my plug would be, if you're a data provider or user in the home buying and selling process, get engaged with this project. You can find out about it on the CLC website or on the OPDA website. and you can find out how to get involved and find your way through there. I would go to the OPDA website because that's the more direct route. And yeah, there's still time to join in the hackathons and be part of this, because if you help shape it, you're going to like it more, aren't you? Although, as I say, I think we're all going to like this tool quite a lot once it's fully developed. And as Eddie said, the time horizon for the kinds of changes that we're looking at here is really quite short. And that's partly because so much of the thinking has already been done, not by this project, but by other players in the market, to get us to the point where we can understand how a smart property data trust framework can embed and be embedded in and underpin the whole process. So, we're really at a turning point now, and it's very exciting.
Fantastic. We'll put some links in the description boxes as well for anybody who wants to get involved and learn more. I think we'll wrap there. A huge thank you to all of you for your time today, and fantastic work on proving that the trust framework has legs, has huge opportunity, as you put it, Eddie, in terms of where we go from here in a short time frame. I can't wait to see the results of the Sandbox in the summer and the outcomes of the hackathons. So we'll look forward to that coming soon. To everybody who's watching, thank you very much for staying through to the end. Don't forget to give us a like and a share. And for more content like this, you can visit us at novus-strategy.com or get in touch at hello@novus-strategy.com. Thank you.
And thank you, and thanks to Novus for your support as well. It's brilliant.
Pleasure.
Thank you.